made Takayanagi, except I was originally named Kyoko after the city of Kyoto, but when I started school, they said, teachers said, that's too difficult to name, when is your birthday? And I said, May, and that's what I've been stuck with all these years. And this is November 30th, 2001. I grew up in California. Actually, I was born in Oakland, California, and raised with, there were 7 children in the family, and I'm third from the oldest. And I was not too happy about taking my younger brother, the youngest, who was 15 years younger than I, and I was thinking, oh, people will think a teenager with a kid. And, I used to hate to take him out just by myself. But Pearl Harbor, California, was a state that had a great deal of prejudice against Asians. It first began when the Chinese, many of the Chinese were imported to work to build the railroad, and then when gold was discovered in California, many left to go to the gold mines. And life was terrible there. They couldn't testify against a white person. If they found any gold, they could not register it themselves. They had to have a white person register it, and often, I guess, they were stolen. The mines were stolen from them. Anyway, conditions were very bad. They were not allowed to own land. They were not allowed to vote. And they were always referred by the Hearst papers as the Yellow Peril. And later on, of course, the Emperor of Japan didn't allow their people to immigrate, and they came much later, so they fell into the same situation. And I remember as a child, teachers always said, how come your parents have been in this country and they're not citizens? And I'd say, I didn't know that there was a law that said they couldn't become naturalized. And one of their arguments was they're so foreign they would never assimilate, so you couldn't become naturalized citizens. And then the thing, Pearl Harbor, occurred, which changed our lives forever. And we were moved to, well, first of all, we had to report to be registered, and then we had all kinds of shots because they didn't want any outbreak of illness in the camps, so we had the usual typhoid, tetanus, and so forth, vaccinations and so forth.
How old were you then?
I was 17. And you know, Pearl Harbor was on a Sunday, and I had to go to school the next day. It was so awful. I mean, and I can understand why everybody wanted to talk about the war, but even in the math class, the Latin class, and the kids, you know, I mean, they didn't, I don't think it was done maliciously, but they made me feel like Pearl Harbor was all my fault. And strangers coming up to you and saying, it's your people who did this, you know? And so you used to feel terrible. And then when we reported had to report go to the camps, I was at Tampere racetracks, and we lived in the horses' stalls that they had whitewashed, and we made the best of it, trying to make a community. I worked as a nurse's aide in the hospital, and and then there were schools, and that was in the spring of '42, and by that fall, in September, the government had time enough to build barracks in various isolated places in the various states. And I was sent to the camp in Utah. There were 10 camps altogether. And I was in Utah in the desert.
With your family?
Pardon?
With your family?
With my family. Well, that's one thing I must say. There were families that were broken up because we had a neighbor, and I think the youngest child was like 4 years old. And the mother was a Japanese language school teacher, and she was sent to another camp. I never saw her in the camp that we were at. And I never knew exactly what happened, whether she was ever reunited with her family. But a lot of tragic things happened to people. One of the big thing that happened was the father, as in many immigrant families, the father was the head of the household, and you told the line. You did what your father said to do, and the thing is, you got into the camps, and a lot of that broke down because there were some kids who lived with their friend's family, and they didn't eat together in the same dining room as a family, and the kids figured, well, I have a roof over my head and I have 3 meals. I don't have to do what my parents tell me to do. So that really, and I think a lot of sad things happen in family. There were those who were very concerned. We had no idea what would happen to us, and the family's parents wanted to go back to Japan, and a youngster born here and was an American had to go. He was underage, and I think it was very hard on various families. So when we went to Utah, and then finally went to when the camps closed, my family was in there until it closed. I left earlier because if you had a job, you could leave. But you had to have a job so you wouldn't be going on any kind of public aid. And the domestics had gone to work in defense plants, and so everybody wanted maids. So that's what I did in St. Paul, Minnesota, to a very neurotic woman. And after a point, I decided I'd look for some other work. But the problem was, it was so difficult to find an apartment because they said, come and look at the apartment, and when they saw you, they said, I'm sorry, it's already taken. And so it was just as well that I worked as a maid and had a place to live with the family. And then much later, of course, there were other jobs and other things, and then finally the camps were closing, and we had to find a place for the family to live. When I said we, my older brother, who had been in Ohio, came to Minneapolis, and between the two of us, he paid for the house and the fuel oil, because in Minnesota you're paying for a lot of fuel oil to keep warm, and my salary paid the weekly groceries. So it was kind of it was a hard time because there was very little, but then the houses also were a lot cheaper than they are today. Then I ended up marrying my husband, Taka, who the family knew, but he was 5 years older than I, so it was at that point when I was in high school and he was 5 years older, I thought he was terribly old. And so it wasn't till years later that we got together again. The thing is, he was stationed at Fort Snelling, Minnesota at the military language school because he was drafted, and then after he came back from the service, a few years later, and then we ran into one another quite by accident, so we got together in Chicago. And his coming to do his graduate work at Harvard, he ended up here. And I have family, and the thing that I'd involve the hardship and so on, the good thing that came out of all of this experience was that before the war, if somebody got a degree in political science at Stanford, I knew somebody, but he could not get a job except at a produce market. And so after the war, people were able to get positions in the various fields they studied for. So that, and we scattered us to other parts of the country. That made it a lot better. They just trouble on the West Coast and then California, Western Oregon, especially California. They always talked about us as just an ethnic group and never as individuals. So when we, like when I went to Minnesota, during World War II, all the cartoons had the Japanese depicted with, like Tojo, like General Tojo had buck teeth and glasses, so they thought we all looked like that. And then they got to know me as a person instead of, so that was worked out nicely. And Minneapolis is a big city, but people seemed very small townish and friendly. So that was a good place to be at that time.
Yeah, but I think that's...
Oh, I'll have...
Tell us about your husband and meeting your husband in the beginning in high school.
Oh, I didn't meet him in high school.
Oh. You knew he was.
I knew our family. The families knew one another.
And you saw him around. Okay.
And when we were living in Minnesota, he was drafted and had to attend the military language school at Fort Snelling in St. Paul, Minnesota, and that's when we saw one another again. And he ended up being sent to the Philippines first, attached to MacArthur's headquarters, and then to Japan for the occupation. And he was saying how a Japanese man was in one of those little trains houses, like little, I guess he's what you call train man. I don't know. They signal and so on.
Signal man.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. And he was kind of surprised to see this Japanese face in the U.S. Army uniform, but very pleased when my husband spoke to him in Japanese, and they sort of created a nice bridge between the white authorities and so that worked out nicely. Originally we were put in the camps because we were considered disloyal, because we were of Japanese descent, and then when the Pacific battles were going very badly, the little islands in the Pacific, and somebody got the idea that we can get the young men who are in the concentration camps to become the translators. And one of the things MacArthur had said is that they had more information about the enemy in that war with the Japanese than in any other war, and it was due to the translators.
So was it due to the Japanese Americans that?
Yeah, there was the Japanese Americans who were.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some terrible stories about how, there were those who were born here, and the parents sent them back, sent the young men back, or the children back to Japan for an education in Japan, and then they came back, and of course they could speak the language much better and knew the Japanese people very well because they lived among them so long. And there's a story about a young man who was used by the U.S. and pretended he with both sides, with the Japanese army and the U.S. army. He was, and he went through some terrible times when he was discovered. But anyway, it's another story. But anyway, the parents were encouraging the sons to volunteer, and then later the draft was instituted again. Because the minute Pearl Harbor occurred, they they made them all, whatever the classification was for aliens. So then that was changed. So, and there were lots of ironies that came out of, like my brother-in-law, my husband's younger brother, had very bad eyes, and he wasn't drafted, but he went into the CIA. I mean, he was in OSS, which was a forerunner of the CIA, and he was doing propaganda work in the China-Burma theater. And when he left that, after he finished his time there, he was drafted because they had lowered the qualifications because so many young men had been killed in various battles in Europe and in Japan. So they lowered the qualifications, and then he was drafted. And he ended up being a clerk in the army, so that he was typing. But there are lots of ironies in that thought. He was in Washington. They were living in my husband's family were living in Washington, and his sister had a job with the Library of Congress, and in what they call geodesic coastline department. So here is this so-called enemy alien, and she's working in the map division at the Library of Congress. And then, before my brother-in-law went overseas, he decided he had to find a job for his dad. And his dad ended up managing the heating system at the CIA in Langley, Virginia. And I go, my goodness.
They couldn't have been too threatened.
So the funny ironies that occurred. So, when Taka and I decided to get married, he has younger sister and younger brother, and his younger brother got married in Chicago, and his sister eloped. So he was the only one left, and his poor father had never been to either wedding. So his father, I have never mentioned his mother because she was gone by the time he was 14 years old. She went to Japan, and the family, all they wanted, I mean, they think of the United States as paved with gold, that whole idea that immigrants had, and early immigrants had, and I guess they were hounding her for money, and she hanged herself in Japan, and the two younger, Tak didn't go because he was 14 in junior high, but his sister and brother, one was 8 and one was 10, went with their mother, and it was a sad situation. Anyway, so we got married in Berkeley because that's where his father lived, and he was a Nichiren Buddhist, and he was very close to the bishop, so he had the bishop marry us, and we had
the Buddhist
and the
bishop?
Nichiren Buddhist, what they call Nichiren Buddhist, which is the temple was in San Francisco, and
But this was a bishop of what?
Nichiren Buddhist church.
Oh, okay. They have bishops. Okay,
yeah.
okay.
And I'm not Buddhist, but the thing is, we agreed to learn all the responses we had to learn in Japanese, but we didn't want to. We drew the line about being married in the temple since we were neither of us practicing Buddhist, and so we were married in his father's house in Berkeley. And it was so cute. He had all his various widow girlfriends come and cook. So, but it was in June, so the windows were open, and it was so funny. During the middle of the ceremony, they burn incense, and there's clappers and there's a good humor man went by, and you could hear the tinkling in the bells of the good humor man.
So what did you wear?
Oh, I just wore a silk shantung dress, and I had somebody make me a headpiece with fresh flowers, with freesias and different fresh flowers from on my head. So, we were married in 1949, and then in 1950 we came to Cambridge. My husband go to Harvard to study architecture. By then, I had our first child was, I guess she was, how old was she? A couple of months old. But we didn't come with him. He started in September, and I went to Minnesota because we didn't have an apartment. He had great difficulty finding an apartment because people would say to him, well, we'd rent to you, but you people cook smelly food. And that's the soy sauce people are eating using now. I mean, he ran into difficulties till a classmate helped him find a place. And then the landlady became the children's Nana Porter after years of living there. And then we decided to move to Newton, to the suburbs for the kids. So we bought a house in Auburndale, and we've been there about 40 years. We've made lots of wonderful friends. I've been involved with a lot of organizations, and because of my own experience, I got very much involved with peace issues and with peace and justice issues. With the civil rights area, we were doing the Newton. We used to take kids up to. We had these freedom schools to Roxbury to meet with kids from Roxbury, and then some Roxbury kids came to Newton, and also when we finally had the METCO program, I was a METCO parent. I know various issues, all kinds of issues there, political parties. Worked hard on the McGovern-McCarthy, and worked on Stuart Hughes' campaign. But I go back to, and one of the interesting races was Adlai Stevenson's race. But my family in Minnesota had several Eisenhower people. So, but anyway, so we've made a nice life here, and I did not go to work till my husband insisted that I stay home till the last child was out of high school before I went out to work. So I volunteered for 25 years. I worked on the Newton School. Well, it was PTA then, and we had the Creative Arts Committee, and I ran the Williams School Elementary School Library and various. And we worked on fair housing issues here in Newton, and then got involved with building some low-income housing here in Newton, and a lot of other issues that came along.
How many children do you have?
I have 3, 5 years apart. So motherhood was kind of spread over.
And your husband, what did he do? He became an architect?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
and he worked for, he actually worked for, he became a senior partner in the firm of Stubbins, where Hugh Stubbins Associates, and Hugh Stubbins happened to have been a teacher of his at Harvard, and he hired him. At that time, he was teaching, and he had his office in the basement of his home in Lexington, and talking for him about 35 years. So he had a very rewarding career. He loves architecture. So.
But when
while my children were still in school, I worked on different issues with different organizations, and Voice of Women was one of the groups that I was active with, and we all got involved with especially the Vietnam War, the activities around that. And then I also worked on Saturdays at the Peace Boutique during the MacArthur campaign. It's very important. But since the children are still in school, it was very important for me to be doing things that was very rewarding as far as the person, to be doing something when there are all these problems in the world. And hopefully we're working to make the world a better place, especially also our activities protesting any of the testing of nuclear weapons and nuclear bombs and whatever. And now we're having to fight the missile shield. And I don't know what to say.
No, go ahead.
Well, if you wanted,
And with various activities during, I think I've been the treasurer of the Boston branch of the of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom for like 35 years or longer, and then it was important for me to be after my own life experience to be involved in all these issues of justice and peace. And after the children had grown up, we're out of high school, I went to work for the American Friends Service Committee, and it was very important that I continue to work with WILF and with the American Friends Service Committee, since they were the two organizations that testified against our incarceration at the hearings in Congress. And the thing is that now, since September 11th, we've had lots of racial profiling going on, and I think it's unfortunate that all the people they're detaining because they're from Middle Eastern countries, and we're repeating some of the things that happened after Pearl Harbor, and I feel very sad that all of this is going on, and we have an Attorney General who feels that that there should be military trials, which means that they don't have to make anything public, and I think, and he feels all of our civil liberties that are being encroached on. And I think they were very hard-won civil liberties, and I think it's unfortunate. And with Attorney General saying all these repressive things are making us safer, and I don't think so. My activities in Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, we were very much involved with a lot of letter writing and working against various legislations. Of course, 4 legislations that we felt we wanted to support, and a lot of demonstrations and rallies that we participated with other peace groups during the Vietnam War. And also used to run into people from American Friends Service Committee, which I went to work for, and I've gone to work for, and I've been with them about 24 years now. And they're very much involved now after September 11th, and they were having conferences and teach-ins and so on, because we feel that one thing is that the bombing is not the way to go, not the way to beat terrorists, because so many innocent civilians, children, are being killed, and of course the Quakers believe in cooperation rather than bombing. That people talk to one another and work out all the problems.